December 7, 1941, a date seared into American memory. The morning sun rose over Pearl Harbor as sailors aboard the USS Arizona prepared for another peaceful Sunday. Within hours, the harbor would become an inferno, and the United States would transform from a nation clinging to isolationism into the world's most formidable industrial war machine. Before that fateful December morning, America stood at a crossroads. The nation still bore scars from the Great Depression, with factories that had once symbolized prosperity now sitting idle or operating at partial capacity. While Europe burned under Nazi aggression and Asia fell beneath Japanese imperial expansion, American political debate centered on whether to involve itself in what many considered distant conflicts. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, however, had been quietly preparing for the inevitable. The attack on Pearl Harbor killed over 2,000 Americans and destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet. But it accomplished something Adolf Hitler and Emperor Hirohito could never have anticipated. It unified a divided nation and awakened an industrial colossus that would ultimately determine the war's outcome. Within days of the attack, Congress declared war, and the machinery of American industry began its unprecedented transformation. The challenge facing America was staggering in scope. The nation needed to build an entirely new military infrastructure, while simultaneously supplying its allies through the Lend-Lease program, which Roosevelt had established in March 1941. Britain stood alone in Europe, battered by the Blitz and struggling to maintain its supply lines across U-boat-infested waters. The Soviet Union, despite its massive population and territory, was reeling from Operation Barbarossa, having lost millions of soldiers and vast industrial regions to the German Wehrmacht. Roosevelt understood that American industrial might would become the decisive factor in this global conflict. In a fireside chat shortly after Pearl Harbor, he outlined an audacious vision. America would become the arsenal of democracy, producing weapons, vehicles, ships, and aircraft on a scale the world had never witnessed. Skeptics questioned whether such production goals were even possible, dismissing them as political rhetoric designed to boost morale. The president called for the production of 60,000 aircraft in 1942 alone, a number that seemed fantastical to industry experts who knew the existing aircraft manufacturing infrastructure could barely produce a fraction of that amount. He demanded 50,000 tanks, 20,000 anti-aircraft guns, and merchant ships faster than German U-boats could sink them. According to historical documentation from the National World War II Museum, these production targets were met not through optimism alone, but through revolutionary changes in manufacturing processes and unprecedented collaboration between government and private industry. The transformation began immediately. Automobile plants that had produced sedans and trucks for civilian markets retooled their assembly lines for tanks and aircraft engines. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant, which would later become legendary for B-24 Liberator bomber production, broke ground in April 1942. Shipyards expanded overnight, employing innovative construction techniques that would revolutionize maritime manufacturing. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking positions previously reserved exclusively for men. America's entry into World War II marked the beginning of what historians would later call the most remarkable industrial mobilization in human history. January 1942 arrived with America facing a daunting reality. The nation possessed determination but lacked the immediate industrial capacity to project military power across two oceans. The conversion from peacetime to wartime production required more than patriotic speeches. It demanded a fundamental restructuring of American economic life. Donald Nelson, appointed by Roosevelt to lead the War Production Board in January 1942, faced the monumental task of coordinating civilian industry's transformation into a military supply network. His agency possessed sweeping powers to allocate resources, prioritize production, and essentially command the American economy. Rubber, steel, aluminum, and countless other materials came under strict rationing as the government directed these resources toward military applications. The automotive industry provided the most dramatic example of industrial conversion. General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and smaller manufacturers ceased civilian automobile production entirely in February 1942. For the first time since the industry's inception, Americans could not purchase new cars. The assembly lines that had made America mobile now produced tanks, aircraft engines, ammunition, and military vehicles. Chevrolet plants manufactured Pratt & Whitney aircraft engines. Cadillac produced tanks and tank components. Oldsmobile factories turned out artillery shells. Henry Ford, though approaching 80 years old and increasingly frail, supervised the construction of the Willow Run bomber plant outside Detroit. The facility stretched over 3 million square feet under one roof, making it the largest room in the world at that time. Ford's engineers applied automobile mass production techniques to aircraft manufacturing, breaking down the complex B-24 Liberator bomber into sub-assemblies that workers could produce on moving assembly lines. Initial skeptics doubted whether aircraft, with their complexity and need for precision, could be mass-produced like automobiles. Willow Run would prove them spectacularly wrong. Shipbuilding underwent an equally dramatic transformation under the guidance of industrialist Henry Kaiser. Traditional shipbuilding was a craft that took months or even years to complete a single vessel. Kaiser revolutionized the industry by applying mass production techniques to maritime construction. His shipyards pioneered welding instead of riveting, which dramatically reduced construction time. Prefabricated sections were built inland and transported to shipyards for rapid assembly. The Liberty Ship program exemplified this new approach. These cargo vessels, designed for simplicity rather than elegance, could be constructed in weeks rather than months. As referenced in historical records from the Maritime Commission, the record for Liberty Ship construction was set in November 1942, when the SS Robert E. Peary was launched just 4 days and 15.5 hours after her keel was laid, a feat that stunned maritime experts worldwide. Aircraft production accelerated through 1942 as new factories came online and existing facilities expanded. Boeing plants in Seattle worked around the clock producing B-17 Flying Fortresses. Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego churned out B-24 Liberators. North American Aviation manufactured the P-51 Mustang, which would later prove crucial to achieving air superiority over Europe. Douglas Aircraft produced transport planes and bombers. The aviation industry, which had employed fewer than 50,000 workers in 1939, swelled to over 2 million by 1943. This industrial transformation required an equally dramatic expansion of the workforce. With millions of men entering military service, American industry faced severe labor shortages that threatened to undermine the entire mobilization effort. March 1942 witnessed the emergence of a workforce revolution that would permanently alter American society. As millions of men marched off to training camps and overseas deployments, factories faced a critical question. Who would operate the machines, weld the ships, and assemble the aircraft that victory demanded? The answer arrived in the form of American women, who entered industrial workplaces in numbers that shattered every precedent. Before Pearl Harbor, cultural norms and outright discrimination had largely confined women to domestic service, teaching, nursing, and clerical positions. Heavy industrial work was considered exclusively male territory, physically too demanding and socially inappropriate for women. The war's demands swept away these barriers with remarkable speed. By 1943, more than 6 million women had joined the industrial workforce, many performing jobs that had been closed to them just 2 years earlier. They operated lathes and drill presses, welded ship hulls, assembled aircraft fuselages, and manufactured ammunition. At Boeing's Seattle plants, women comprised a significant portion of the workforce building B-17 bombers. In shipyards from Portland to Baltimore, female welders proved just as capable as their male counterparts. The government's War Advertising Council created propaganda campaigns encouraging women to enter war industries, with the iconic Rosie the Riveter becoming the symbol of female industrial workers. Norman Rockwell's famous illustration, published on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post in May 1943, depicted a muscular woman in work clothes, riveting gun across her lap, eating lunch atop industrial scaffolding. The image communicated a powerful message. Women were strong, capable, and essential to victory. Rose Will Monroe, a real-life riveter at the Willow Run bomber plant, became one of several women who embodied the Rosie spirit. She appeared in promotional films and war bond drives, demonstrating that the propaganda image reflected genuine reality. At Willow Run, women comprised approximately 40% of the workforce at peak production, performing every job from riveting to inspection to crane operation. The integration of women into industrial work was not seamless. They faced skepticism from male co-workers, unequal pay for equivalent work, and the challenge of balancing factory shifts with domestic responsibilities. Childcare became a critical issue as mothers entered factories. The government responded with the Lanham Act, which funded childcare centers near war plants. Though these facilities served only a fraction of the need, African Americans, both men and women, also found new opportunities in war industries, though they continued facing systemic discrimination. President Roosevelt's Executive Order 8802, issued in June 1941, under pressure from civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph, prohibited racial discrimination in defense industries. The order created the Fair Employment Practice Committee to enforce compliance. While discrimination persisted, the war years saw hundreds of thousands of African Americans move from agricultural work in the South to industrial jobs in northern and western cities, a demographic shift historians call the Second Great Migration. The home front mobilization extended beyond factory work. Americans faced rationing of essential goods including sugar, coffee, meat, butter, and gasoline. Families planted victory gardens to supplement food supplies, with these gardens eventually producing nearly 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States. Scrap drives collected metal, rubber, and paper for recycling into war materials. Children participated enthusiastically, gathering aluminum cans and old tires, feeling they contributed to the war effort. War bond drives raised billions of dollars to finance military operations. Hollywood celebrities toured the country promoting bond sales. The entertainment industry produced films that maintained morale while communicating government messages about rationing, security, and sacrifice. June 1943 marked a pivotal moment when American industrial production reached levels that began fundamentally altering the war's trajectory. The retooling, workforce expansion, and organizational efforts of the previous 18 months were bearing fruit in the form of a material avalanche that would ultimately overwhelm Axis forces through sheer volume. The statistics from this period were staggering in their magnitude. The Willow Run plant, which had struggled initially with the complexity of bomber production, hit its stride in spring 1943. By summer, workers were completing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. The plant operated 24 hours daily, 3 shifts of workers moving continuously through the massive facility. By war's end, Willow Run alone would produce over 8,600 aircraft, more than the entire aircraft output of Italy throughout the war. Liberty ship production demonstrated similar acceleration. Henry Kaiser's Richmond, California shipyards employed over 90,000 workers at peak production. The shipways never sat empty. As soon as one vessel launched, workers laid the keel for the next. By mid-1943, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships daily, replacing tonnage faster than German U-boats could sink it. This reversal of the Battle of the Atlantic's arithmetic proved crucial to maintaining supply lines to Britain and the Soviet Union. Tank production illustrated the scale of American industrial mobilization. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, operated by Chrysler, produced M3 and M4 Sherman tanks on assembly lines that borrowed directly from automotive manufacturing techniques. The plant employed 40,000 workers and operated continuously. By 1943, the facility was producing more tanks monthly than all of Germany's tank production combined. The Sherman tank, while not matching German panzers in armor or firepower, could be produced in such quantities that American forces eventually achieved overwhelming numerical superiority. According to documentation from the United States Army's historical records, American industry produced approximately 88,000 tanks during the war years, compared to Germany's 46,000 and Japan's 6,000. The qualitative debates about individual tank designs became less relevant when American forces could field 5 Shermans for every German Panther or Tiger tank. Aircraft production reached truly extraordinary levels by mid-war. Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita produced B-17 Flying Fortresses in numbers that enabled the United States Army Air Forces to conduct massive daylight strategic bombing campaigns over Europe. Consolidated and Ford produced B-24 Liberators that ranged across the Pacific and Europe. North American Aviation's P-51 Mustang, equipped with drop tanks for extended range, finally provided bomber formations with fighter escort capable of accompanying them to Berlin and back. The numbers told an unmistakable story. America produced nearly 300,000 aircraft during the war years, more than twice the combined production of Germany and Japan. At peak production in 1944, American factories were completing one aircraft every 5 minutes around the clock. This aerial armada provided the United States and its allies with air superiority that proved decisive in both theaters. Small arms and ammunition production reached similarly impressive scales. The Springfield Armory, Rock Island Arsenal, and various contracted manufacturers produced millions of M1 Garand rifles, which General George Patton would famously call the greatest battle implement ever devised. Ammunition plants operated continuously, producing billions of rounds. American industry supplied not only its own forces, but equipped British, French, Soviet, and Chinese armies through Lend-Lease. The scale of production created logistical challenges as significant as the manufacturing itself. How could this torrent of weapons, vehicles, aircraft, and supplies reach fighting fronts across 2 oceans? September 1943 found American ports operating at capacity unprecedented in maritime history, loading vessels bound for combat zones spanning from the South Pacific to North Africa to Britain. The industrial miracle of production meant nothing if weapons and supplies remained stockpiled in American warehouses instead of reaching soldiers at the front. The logistics challenge was immense. Every tank, aircraft, artillery piece, truck, and crate of ammunition needed to cross thousands of miles of ocean infested with enemy submarines and vulnerable to air attack. Every soldier required not just weapons, but food, clothing, medicine, fuel, and countless other supplies. Modern mechanized warfare consumed resources at rates that dwarfed previous conflicts. The United States Army's Quartermaster Corps, Transportation Corps, and Support Services grew into massive organizations. The Transportation Corps alone eventually included over 700,000 soldiers, dedicated solely to moving supplies. Port battalions worked around the clock loading vessels with military cargo. In Norfolk, Virginia, the world's largest naval base expanded dramatically, with new piers, warehouses, and loading facilities constructed at breakneck pace. The convoy system protected merchant shipping from submarine attack. Vessels traveled in large groups escorted by destroyers, destroyer escorts, and aircraft when within range of land bases. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had threatened to starve Britain into submission during 1942, turned decisively in the Allies' favor during 1943, as American shipbuilding outpaced German submarine sinkings and improved anti-submarine warfare tactics destroyed U-boats faster than Germany could build replacements. Lend-Lease transformed America into the supply depot for Allied nations. The program, which had begun modestly in 1941 with aid to Britain, expanded dramatically after Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941 and exploded in scope following Pearl Harbor. By war's end, Lend-Lease shipments would total over $50 billion, an astronomical sum equivalent to roughly $700 billion in current dollars. The Soviet Union received particularly substantial assistance through Lend-Lease, though this aid remained controversial politically and was often downplayed during the Cold War. According to materials referenced from the Defense Logistics Agency's historical archives, America shipped nearly 400,000 trucks and jeeps to the Soviet Union, providing the Red Army with motorized transport that enabled rapid offensives. 15 million pairs of boots helped shod Soviet soldiers. Thousands of locomotives and railway cars restored Soviet rail networks damaged by retreating German forces. The Soviet Union also received substantial food aid through Lend-Lease, including over 4 million tons of foodstuffs. This assistance helped prevent famine and kept Soviet industrial workers productive. While Soviet propaganda emphasized domestic production and downplayed American aid, Soviet generals privately acknowledged Lend-Lease's crucial importance. Marshal Georgy Zhukov later admitted that without American trucks, the Red Army's spectacular advances from Stalingrad to Berlin would have been impossible. Britain received the largest share of Lend-Lease aid, totaling over $30 billion. This included aircraft, tanks, ships, ammunition, food, industrial equipment, and raw materials. British industry focused on specialized production while relying on American quantity. The relationship proved symbiotic. British innovations in radar, cryptography, and jet engines combined with American industrial muscle to create military advantages neither nation could achieve alone. The Pacific Theater presented unique logistical challenges due to the vast distances between bases. Admiral Chester Nimitz's island-hopping campaign required establishing forward bases on captured islands, then supplying those bases across thousands of miles of ocean. Construction battalions, known as Seabees, transformed coral atolls into operational airfields and supply depots within weeks of their capture. The logistics network extended even to mundane but essential items that maintained soldier morale and effectiveness. January 1944 witnessed American industrial ingenuity reaching beyond mere quantity into qualitative improvements that gave Allied forces decisive technological advantages. The massive production numbers told only part of the story. American industry was simultaneously innovating at a pace that left Axis powers unable to respond effectively. Radar technology exemplified this innovation cycle. British scientists had developed the fundamental radar concepts in the late 1930s, creating the chain home system that helped Britain survive the Battle of Britain. American industry took these concepts and, through MIT's radiation laboratory, refined radar into compact, reliable systems that could be mass-produced and installed in aircraft, ships, and mobile ground units. The proximity fuse, developed through collaboration between American and British scientists, transformed anti-aircraft artillery from an imprecise art into a lethal science. Shells equipped with miniature radar detonated near their targets automatically, dramatically increasing kill rates against aircraft and making the V-1 flying bomb campaign against Britain far less effective than Germany hoped. The Manhattan Project represented the most ambitious and secretive scientific industrial program in history. Beginning in 1942, this vast enterprise employed over 130,000 people at facilities across the country, most unaware of the project's ultimate goal. The industrial scale was staggering. The Oak Ridge facility in Tennessee consumed more electricity than many entire states, operating massive calatrons to separate uranium isotopes. The Hanford site in Washington state featured nuclear reactors producing plutonium. Los Alamos in New Mexico brought together the world's leading physicists to design the actual weapons. J. Robert Oppenheimer led the scientific team at Los Alamos, coordinating theoretical physicists, engineers, and chemists in solving unprecedented problems. The project required developing entirely new industrial processes for materials that barely existed in nature. It demanded precision engineering for components that would experience conditions never before created by humans. The July 1945 Trinity test in New Mexico demonstrated that American science and industry had achieved what many considered impossible, harnessing the fundamental forces binding atomic nuclei. Synthetic rubber production solved a crisis that threatened to cripple American mobility. Japan's conquest of Southeast Asian territories cut off natural rubber supplies that were essential for tires, gaskets, hoses, and countless other applications. Without rubber, tanks couldn't roll, aircraft couldn't land safely, and trucks couldn't deliver supplies. American chemists, working with information shared by German scientists before the war, developed synthetic rubber production processes. The government financed construction of 51 synthetic rubber plants. By 1944, synthetic rubber production exceeded 1 million tons annually, completely replacing lost natural rubber sources. Petroleum refining underwent similar innovation. High-octane aviation fuel allowed aircraft engines to generate more power without detonating prematurely. American refineries developed catalytic cracking processes that dramatically increased high-octane fuel production. This gave American and British aircraft performance advantages over opponents using lower-quality fuel. The petroleum industry also produced vast quantities of lubricants, diesel fuel, and other petroleum products essential to mechanized warfare. The pharmaceutical industry achieved breakthrough after breakthrough under wartime pressure. Penicillin, discovered by Alexander Fleming in Britain in 1928, remained a laboratory curiosity through the 1930s. American pharmaceutical companies, spurred by military demand for infection treatment, developed fermentation processes for mass production. By 1944, penicillin production reached levels sufficient to treat all Allied wounded. This antibiotic prevented countless deaths from infected wounds that would have been fatal in previous wars. Blood plasma preservation techniques, developed by Charles Drew and other researchers, enabled battlefield blood transfusions that saved thousands of lives. The Red Cross established a national blood donation program that collected millions of units. Refrigeration technology kept plasma viable during long shipments to combat zones. Communications technology advanced rapidly under military necessity. Radio equipment became more compact, reliable, and powerful. The development of frequency modulation reduced interference and improved clarity. May 1944 arrived with Allied forces poised to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history, an operation that would have been impossible without the industrial foundation built over the preceding years. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, would demonstrate how American industrial production had transformed military possibility. The invasion fleet assembled in British ports represented an armada unprecedented in scale. Over 5,000 ships and landing craft would cross the English Channel on D-Day, June 6, 1944. These vessels ranged from massive battleships providing fire support to specialized landing craft designed specifically for amphibious assault. The landing ship tank, or LST, exemplified American industrial innovation, a flat-bottomed vessel that could beach itself, drop its bow ramp, and discharge tanks and vehicles directly onto shore. American shipyards had produced over 1,000 LSTs, making possible amphibious operations on a scale previously unimaginable. The air superiority protecting the invasion force reflected years of aircraft production finally reaching fruition. Over 13,000 Allied aircraft supported the invasion, achieving complete dominance of the skies over Normandy. German aircraft were so scarce that Luftwaffe fighters made virtually no appearance on D-Day itself. This air superiority resulted from the combination of American aircraft production, overwhelming German defensive capacity, and the long-range P-51 Mustang, finally allowing bomber escorts to protect formations throughout their missions. General Dwight Eisenhower, commanding the invasion, had at his disposal more than 2 million soldiers in Britain waiting to cross the Channel. Equipping this force required everything American industry had been producing: uniforms, boots, weapons, ammunition, vehicles, rations, medical supplies, and thousands of other items. Every soldier carried an M1 Garand rifle or carbine, wore boots and uniforms from American textile mills, and carried rations packed in American canneries. The famous Mulberry Harbors demonstrated how industrial production enabled tactical innovation. Since capturing a major port intact seemed unlikely, Allied planners designed artificial harbors to be towed across the Channel and assembled off the invasion beaches. These massive concrete and steel structures, built in British shipyards, created protected harbors where Liberty ships could unload cargo directly to the beaches. The Mulberries remained operational for months, enabling the flow of supplies that sustained Allied armies as they broke out of Normandy and drove across France. The Red Ball Express, organized after the Normandy breakout, illustrated both the power and challenges of American logistics. As Allied armies advanced rapidly across France during August and September 1944, supply lines stretched dangerously thin. The Red Ball Express consisted of thousands of trucks driving around the clock from Normandy beaches to forward positions, delivering fuel, ammunition, and supplies. At its peak, over 6,000 trucks operated continuously, driven largely by African American soldiers who proved the courage and capability that segregation had denied recognition. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, American industrial might enabled island-hopping campaigns that pushed Japanese forces steadily backward. The Central Pacific Offensive under Admiral Nimitz captured island after island: Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, Guam, establishing airfields from which B-29 Superfortress bombers could reach the Japanese home islands. Each invasion required amphibious assault forces supported by massive naval and air power, all sustained by supply lines stretching thousands of miles across the Pacific. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, sometimes called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, demonstrated American numerical and technological superiority. Japanese naval aviation, once qualitatively superior to American forces, had been overwhelmed by the quantity of American pilots trained and aircraft produced. American pilots shot down over 600 Japanese aircraft, while losing fewer than 150 of their own. The Japanese carrier force, once the most powerful in the world, was effectively destroyed as an offensive weapon. General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Campaign showed how industrial production enabled multiple simultaneous major operations. February 1945 found the end of the war in sight as Allied forces converged on Germany from east and west, with American industrial production having created conditions making Axis victory impossible. The arithmetic of production had become the arithmetic of defeat for Germany and Japan. In Europe, Soviet forces pushed toward Berlin from the east while American, British, and Canadian armies crossed the Rhine from the west. Every Soviet offensive rolled forward on American trucks and locomotives. Every artillery barrage expended shells and powder that American factories had helped produce. Soviet soldiers wore boots from American leather and ate rations supplemented by American grain. While Soviet propaganda emphasized domestic production and sacrifice, the industrial assistance America provided through Lend-Lease had proven indispensable. The Western Allies' advance into Germany relied entirely on American logistical support. By spring 1945, American forces in Europe numbered over 3 million soldiers, all requiring continuous supply. The Red Ball Express had evolved into a sophisticated logistics network utilizing railways, waterways, pipelines, and truck convoys. The Pluto pipeline under the ocean, delivered fuel from England to France beneath the English Channel, an engineering feat that symbolized the industrial ingenuity applied to solving military problems. Germany's situation had become hopeless. German industry, despite impressive production increases achieved by Armaments Minister Albert Speer through 1944, could not match the combined output of American, British, and Soviet factories. Strategic bombing by American B-17 and B-24 formations had devastated German cities and industry. The synthetic fuel plants that Germany relied upon to replace captured Romanian oil fields were systematically destroyed during 1944. Leaving German tanks and aircraft immobilized for lack of fuel. German soldiers fought with courage and skill, but they could not overcome the material superiority arrayed against them. Adolf Hitler's suicide on April 30, 1945, and Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, ended the European War. American industrial production had created the weapons, vehicles, aircraft, and supplies that made Allied victory inevitable once the industrial machine reached full capacity. The Pacific War continued through summer 1945, though Japan's position was equally hopeless. American submarines, produced in unprecedented numbers by American shipyards, had strangled Japanese merchant shipping. Japan's island empire, conquered to secure raw materials and oil, became useless when submarines sank the tankers and freighters carrying those resources home. Japanese cities burned under B-29 raids flying from captured islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once dominant in the Pacific, had been reduced to ineffective remnants hiding in ports without fuel. The Manhattan Project's culmination in August 1945 demonstrated American industrial and scientific capability in its most terrible form. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9 killed over 200,000 people, and convinced Emperor Hirohito to accept unconditional surrender, despite opposition from military leaders preferring continued resistance. Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, ended World War II. The final accounting revealed production statistics almost incomprehensible in scale. American industry had produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, over 88,000 tanks, over 6,000 naval vessels ranging from battleships to landing craft, 2 million trucks, and quantities of ammunition, weapons, and supplies sufficient to equip armies on multiple continents simultaneously. This production occurred while American civilian living standards, though constrained by rationing, remained higher than any other combatant nation. The cost in American lives, over 400,000 dead, represented genuine sacrifice, though proportionally far less than losses suffered by the Soviet Union, Germany, Japan, or China. The war transformed America into a global superpower, its industrial capacity intact and enhanced while every other major industrial nation lay devastated. The women who had entered factories in millions returned home, or to civilian work after the war. Though many retained industrial skills and workplace experience that challenged pre-war gender norms, the Rosie the Riveters had proven capabilities that later generations would build upon. African Americans who had moved north for defense industry jobs often remained, building communities that would form the foundation of the civil rights movement. American industry converted back to civilian production, producing automobiles, appliances, and consumer goods with the same energy it had applied to weapons production. The industrial infrastructure built or expanded during wartime years, factories, shipyards, airports, remained to support post-war economic growth. The organizational and management techniques developed under wartime pressure revolutionized American business practices. The arsenal of democracy had fulfilled its mission. American industrial production, combined with the courage of Allied soldiers and the suffering of civilian populations worldwide, had defeated totalitarian regimes that threatened human freedom. The factories, workers, engineers, and managers who transformed American production capacity had proven as decisive as any army in determining the war's outcome. Industrial might, properly mobilized and directed, had indeed altered history's course.